Hey, what's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up. Anthony Sanfilippo's here. I'm Bob Wankel. Phillies coming off of a series in Arizona, a place that they never win. They can never figure it out. Against the first place Diamondbacks team, they win 3 out of 4 games, 3 in a row. And Anthony, things are rolling for this Phillies team. They are finally back over the 500 mark. It's been well over a month since then. And with a win in Oakland on Friday night, are recording this on Friday morning. With a win in Oakland on Friday night, the Phillies will be at their high water mark of the season, which is 2 games over 500. So they're rolling right now. And we'll bring you in here. And I guess, what a difference 15 days makes,
It's pretty incredible, right? I mean, it's kind of funny because we would sit here and we would talk, we would text for the last month and a half, like questioning everything that Rob Thompson would say to us about, like, yeah, it's coming. Don't worry, it's coming. This offense is going to be fine. It's coming. We're going to be okay. We kept hearing, oh, we want to get turns to June. It'll be fine. And it's like you didn't want to really believe that they had that light switch, like it's something that could just really happen. Like you wanted to say, okay, we hope it happens, but you can't just rely on that. And damn it, he was right. And damn it, they've been right. Like they got to this month and it was like, all right, boys, time to play baseball. Season starts now. And they just, in the last 12 games, they've been excellent, 10-2. And it doesn't, at the beginning of this streak, we were like, well, they're beating up on the Nationals and the Tigers. But you go 5-2 against the Dodgers and Diamondbacks. They're 2 of the 3 best teams in the National League record-wise, 2 of the top 6 in baseball record-wise. And you just basically you should have swept Arizona, right? I mean, really, think about it, the one loss, they should have won that game. Like it's unbelievable that they would just go out there and say, yeah, now it doesn't matter. We're just going to go out and we're just going to bludgeon you to death like you all thought we were going to do all year. We just waited till June to do it. It's fascinating to me, and that's why I think we love talking about it and covering this team and being around it, because baseball always surprises you. And we've still been bullish. We still believe that this was a good enough team to make the playoffs. But I think that we started to kind of drift down a path, Bob, in recent weeks that we still believed in them, but we believed in them because the National League didn't run away from them. Right. So much as it was that they were just really good. And maybe it is that they're going to get into the playoffs because they are a really good team like we thought they should have been at the beginning of the year. We'll see. Still a lot of time to go, but the way that they've been playing lately, I'm starting to think maybe we were right at the beginning of the year more so than what we've been saying in the last few weeks.
Well, I give them a lot of credit because I think coming into the month, given where they were at, the goal for me was get to 500 by July 1.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, and we talked about how it would be a difficult road to do it. It was not going to be easy to get there, but there was a path. And now you look up, you're midway through the month and they've cleared that hurdle. Now you hope that they don't fall back, and they certainly have an opportunity here this weekend against a team that frankly is probably, when it's all said and done, going to compete to be one of the worst teams in the history of the sport. And I do understand that they've played better, and we'll get to this in a little bit. They actually are throwing 2 decent starting pitching looks at the Phillies this weekend as well. So I don't want to just chalk this up to 3 straight wins, book it, but the Phillies are in an advantageous spot here. And it's funny, though, you talked about where they started this season and how everything is just sort of turned on here in June. They're 10-4. They've won 10 of their last 12. It kind of goes back to what we talked about, though, when things weren't going well. This idea of complacency, this idea of we're good enough that we can just turn it on, the idea of a hangover that it's not October. We don't have the same juice that we did last fall. All of those different criticisms. We talked about the psychological element of it. Is it hard to get yourself into that spot right off the jump? And it's disappointing that they didn't play well for 2 months. But do you think in hindsight now that we've seen this play out and you see this lineup starting to get things going, you're seeing some good things from the starting rotation, at least from the 4 spots that they actually have occupied, do you kind of feel like, yeah, actually, you know what? This does give validity to that assertion that these guys just weren't really dialed in from the jump? Or is it a matter of they needed 70 games to really get going? I mean, how do you look at it now?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about this in all sports, Bob, about how it's why it's so hard to come back and have a good start to the following season after you've been to the final or the championship or the World Series, whatever sport you're talking about, right? And it's difficult, right? I mean, it's difficult to there's always that we always talk about the hangover, the letdown, and it's more so because of just how long you play and just how much more of the sport you're playing than everybody else from the season before. I mean, baseball is actually one of the easier ones when you think about it, in the sense that it's only about 5 weeks more than everybody else. I mean, the NBA and the NHL, they go for 2 full months longer than the people that don't make the playoffs, right? The NFL, you're playing sometimes 4 more football games, which is a lot on the body, right? He just beat you up for another month. So there is something to that. And so when you say it took them 70 games to get started, okay, yeah, I mean, maybe it did. Maybe they needed to kind of get through and just kind of the fact that they were hanging around and just preventing themselves from disaster, maybe that's just all they needed until it really got rolling. And now here they are, and they're there. I mean, that could very well be the thing. If they were a team that didn't make the playoffs last year and had the start that they had this year, then we might be looking somewhere else. We might try to find other reasons why they sucked for 50 games. But the fact is like, you know what? When you play into November and your body's not getting the recovery that it needs, and then you're right back at it in February in spring training, yeah, maybe it does take that much time.
So I think it's interesting to speculate and try to parse through what exactly happened here at the start. Why does it look so much different now? But I guess the more important question is this: have they truly cleared the hurdle? Because I think if you revert back to right around when we had Kalen Cotham on the show, we talked about that was in the middle of the Houston series, and they had just gotten over 500 at that point, and we are starting to feel good about where Aaron Nola was at. We saw some of the pitching coming around. The bullpen numbers had really turned around from their struggles the first couple of weeks of the season. And he said, okay, these are the Phillies that I expected to see. They're fine. And then the month of May happens, and it's utterly dreadful. Do we feel like that? Okay, they've gotten past all these early season issues, and from here on out, this is a march to the 88, 89, 90 type win season that we expected all along? Or do we think it's very possible that, yeah, you know what, there could be another 2-week stretch, they dip back below 500? Like, my thing is, as I watch this now, I'm like, don't fall back below 500. I understand that you're going to hit some bumps in the road. Maybe you get 3-4 games up. Maybe you come back down, but don't go 2, 3, 4 games under 500 anymore. I want to say I trust them to have cleared that hurdle. I'm curious to know what you think.
Yeah, I do. I think so too. I think that they've cleared that hurdle. When you talked about Oakland playing better of late, and they are, and they do have a couple of okay pitchers going this weekend, but they're going to win. The Phillies need to win this series. I mean, they're not going to. You can't lose a series to Oakland. And so even if you just win the series and go 2 out of 3, let's just say, although I do still think they're going to sweep them. I do. But let's say if you can go 2 out of 3, you're 2 games up, and then you come home to play Atlanta and the Mets. The Mets stink. Like, let's be honest, they stink. Like, they really do. So it really comes down to, don't get swept at home by the Braves. As long as you don't get swept at home by the Braves, I think you're fine. And then you start looking into, as the rest of the month progresses and into July, like, yeah, I mean, it does start to lighten up a little bit. And so you really shouldn't be in a situation where you find yourself losing 5-6 games in a row. Like, that really comes down to, you've gotten those bad stretches out of your system already. You've had 3 of them this season so far. I mean, think about that. The Phillies are over 500, having lost 5, 5, and 6 games in a row at 3 different points during the season. Okay, that's 0-16 over 3 separate weeks. Okay, and they're a game over 500 still. So it tells you a lot. Like, just prevent that kind of bad run from happening, and you'll be fine. You'll be able to climb the standings and climb and get that record, moving north of 500 for the rest of the season.
So then it kind of transitions and it pivots, and let's get to the Diamondback series. I don't want to get too far away here, but it kind of So you get to 500. Now you get over 500, and then you start to look at the field a little bit more. And I know that we've talked about where they're at in relation to other teams in the National League. What are they really dialed in on here? Is there an opportunity to possibly catch Atlanta? I think not personally. But then you look at the wild card landscape, and they're starting to clear some other teams now. Like they just passed Milwaukee, who's at 500. They're tied now, or both the Phillies and Pirates are each a game over 500. I would bet on the Phillies to outlast the Pirates in that scenario moving forward. No offense to what the Pirates have accomplished this year. But they're sitting currently a game and a half out of the wild card. The Giants occupy the final spot at 36 and 32. If I'm not mistaken, the Giants and Dodgers play each other this weekend, the second and third teams in the NL West right now. So you kind of hope here, if you're a Phillies fan and I think it's probably irresponsibly early to be worried about playoff positioning and are you in, are you out? But I also think when you put your head on the pillow at the end of the night, it's kind of nice to know, hey, if the season ended today, we're in. And they're starting to knock on that door now. You obviously have Miami continues to play pretty well. I know they lost 2 out of 3 this week in Seattle, but again, they are a handful of games over 500. And I'm curious to see what ultimately becomes of the Diamondbacks. As I watch that series, I've told you numerous times, like I like that lineup. I think that they're a good team. You've talked about their pitching. The bullpen's not particularly special. The starting rotation, you get by 1-2 guys. You don't feel great about what you're seeing there. And this is the first time all season that you really saw some warts in that Arizona team. So, do they start to come back to earth at a rapid pace now? Or are the Dodgers just going to sprint past them in the next 2 weeks? It's really kind of curious because the reason why I kind of fixate on the standings is because there's so many teams that remain in it. I mean, the new wild card format last year kept a couple teams in it. Right now, 80% of the league is in it. Cincinnati a game under. I mean, so it's a really interesting, I don't want to use the word race yet, but it's an interesting field.
It is an interesting field. And I think that I think you've nailed it here, Bob, because really when it comes down to it, to me, there are 3 teams in the National League that are going to have a shot to go to the World Series. The Braves, who are to me the favorite, the Dodgers, and the Phillies. Because I just don't think that anybody else has as complete a roster. Not to say that the Phillies are complete, because they're not, or the Braves and the Mets. I mean, the Dodgers are not complete. They both have their issues as well, but they're the most complete teams. And you pointed out, like, look, I like Arizona too. I mean, at the beginning of the year, I thought that they were an up and coming team. I thought that they would challenge a little bit in that division, but you're right. Their pitching it's just not good enough. They remind me a lot of the Phillies when we thought that, Gabe's first year, that maybe that they, this is a team that can make a run, and they look good for, 3 months of the season. And then all of a sudden the second half, they fell off the map, right? And completely melted down at the end of the year. In the sense that I think that they got off to such a good start, and so they're going to be part of it. I just don't know that they have the pitching to hang in. They just don't. So I think that, and you mentioned last episode, the Padres, I think, are going to probably.
That's what I was going to ask you. I said, are we forgetting, when you name the 3 teams that can go to the World Series in the National League, do you think that we're overlooking the Padres? Because they, like the Phillies, got off to a similar start. They weren't hitting. Everybody was just unbelievably surprised by that. Now they're only 2 games under. They're starting to come back a little bit. I know they lost last night to Cleveland, but they've gotten it together a little bit now. So do you still think that there's enough top end talent there where they can make a run as well?
I still don't love their pitching.
Okay.
I think that, certainly their lineup should be sensational, and it's
really the top half of that lineup. I mean, again, like it's one of those ones where you look at it and you're like 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know about this, but 1 through 5, it's about as good as it gets.
Yeah. I just don't think that. I think do I think that they're a playoff caliber team? I do. And of course, once you get in, anything can happen, right? So we saw that last year. So I guess technically they could make a run. But I put them a tier below. I just put them a tier below the top 3 teams in my mind. And now the Phillies are 3rd in my mind. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm sitting here saying, well, yeah, they're 1A, 1B, 1C. They're not. I mean, the Braves are clearly 1. The Dodgers to me are 2, and the Phillies are 3. Padres are probably 4 in the National League, in my mind.
Okay. So that brings us to this Diamondback series, and we've talked a lot about how much the Phillies have struggled in Arizona. I think the last time they won a series in Arizona was 2016, if I'm not mistaken. I know over the last handful of years, I looked it up the other day, they were 4-12 in their last 16 games out there before this week. I mean, they've struggled out there, and we all know it. It's been well established. And now you're playing a good Diamondbacks team, one that roughed you up here in Philadelphia last month. So they go out, and you said it, they probably were in position to sweep this series. And I kind of regret the fact that we didn't record after the opener, because you get a 5-1 in that game. You come out, you build the early lead right away, and you say, all right, here we go. They're really clicking right now. And then, Matt Strom's not very good. You have 3-4 relievers that back him up, none of which are your best arms. And you lose a game where it's like, hey, if we don't score 12 runs, we're not winning tonight. Like, it was just almost like you finish the game on Sunday. Rob Thompson tells you that we have everybody available that we want. We're like, even Alvarado. And he says, hey, yeah, probably. And we kind of, all rolled our eyes at that, knew they probably weren't going to use Alvarado on Monday night after throwing almost 30 pitches on Sunday. But I was a little bit surprised at how conservative they were, especially even when you got to the 6th inning, the game was tied, and you went back to Dylan Covey again for that 2nd inning. That was the thing I really did not understand. I know that you're not going to roll out your best relievers in the 3rd, 4th inning, but once that game turns to the back half, I was very, very surprised at the conservative nature with which they approached that game. That was probably my only criticism of the week. It's probably the one negative or the one bad thing I could say about what the Phillies put out there over the 4-game series against the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little perplexed by the bullpen decisions for that game. I think they were exacerbated by, a couple of things. The most important being, and this is just from talking to Rob a little bit, I don't think he wanted to go into a 4-game series and burn his best relievers in the first game of a 4-game series.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that he kind of felt that let's try and get through this with these other guys and make it happen. And if we can, bonus. If we don't, okay, that stinks. But we do have our top 3 pitchers going in the next 3 games, and we'll have our full complement of good relievers behind them. The question then becomes philosophy. Are you all about the win in the moment for every game, and then decide, worry about tomorrow? I mean, yeah, you have to do that when the games matter in October, right? Because that's a big difference than in June. But maybe in June you take the different approach and say, let's not worry about managing that way for a game in June. Let's make sure that we have the right people to have more of a long-term success. And it's funny because, I had brought up to him, and we talked about it on Twitter, but I had brought up to him during the Dodgers series about, hey, teams are starting to throw lefty openers against you with the lineup that you had. This was when he had Harper hitting 3. And I said, is that something you're worried about? He said, no, we'll just adjust the lineup if we have to. And then the next day they adjusted the lineup, right? So, but he did point out when I asked that question, he said, hey, you know what, though? He said, the Dodgers used up all 3 of their lefties against us in that game. And then, of course, they went out and they called up Kolarek, so they added a 4th. But the point is that, he was pointing out that Dave Roberts was managing those games to win each individual game in the moment and not think about the rest of the series. Maybe that helps the Phillies win 2 out of 3, right? So maybe the fact that you go with lesser bullpen guys with a 5-1 lead and hope that they can hold on, and they don't, but, is why they are able to win 3 out of 4 in Arizona and maybe not split it.
Yeah, and you certainly have the benefit of hindsight saying that, and it worked for them. And so if you are going to tell me that they punted to an extent in that first game in order to end up ultimately winning the series, I can't argue with that, because any result of the Phillies walking out of there with 3 out of 4, I can't ultimately criticize it, but in the moment I did. And the only thing I will say, I'll concede that you go to Strom, he was not very good. You go to Marte, he was not very good. Then you pivot to Covey, he was okay for an inning, but not particularly good. And then Vasquez wasn't good. I mean, so you do need someone other than those first 3-4 guys out of the bullpen, or I should say those top 3-4 guys out of the bullpen to pitch well. And if none of them are going to pitch well in a bullpen game at the start, at what point do you say we're not going to utilize additional resources in order to win this game at all costs? And,
right.
I guess that's ultimately what they did. I was surprised that we got Covey for the second inning in the sixth. I think that I didn't mind Marte backing up Strom. That did not bother me. But then you get through the fifth with Covey, and I was surprised. I was surprised that we then saw another inning of him. I guess that did surprise me.
Yeah, I'm a little perplexed as to
I'd rather see Hoffman in the sixth
yeah
than see Hoffman and mop up late. And I know that he had the blow up against the Dodgers on Saturday. I just can't do. I know he's kind of become like the easy target, but I just can't. Like, come on with the Dylan Covey stuff.
Well,
man.
I don't understand what they see in him that they're keeping him on the roster ahead of Brogdon and ahead of Marte, right? I mean, like, I know that they want a guy who can potentially throw multiple innings, and they don't think Brogdon or Marte are there at this point, which is why they're down. They Thompson said they want to make them guys who can throw 2 innings or 3 innings if need be. Okay, fine. But does that mean that Dylan Covey should be the guy protecting the lead, or trying to hold on to keep the game close in the middle innings against a really good team? I don't know. That's where I agree with you, and I kind of I'm not so sure that was the right thing to do. But
yeah, Marte is a really interesting study. I mean, there's games where you look at him and say, wow, this guy has I don't want to say elite level stuff, but stuff that really can play late in games, and he can get important outs for you. Brogdon, I will say this. I've talked to some people. I'm not trying to be like cute here, but I've talked to some people, and they've echoed exactly what we've said on this show, which is not always the case. And I will talk a little bit about that later on. Yeah. I actually received some pushback from a couple of my takes here recently, some criticism, if you will. But they said, they killed Brogdon. Like they literally killed Brogdon in the month of May. Like they need to reset him. They need to let him kind of physically, I think, get a breather, mentally reset himself. And, that the 2 people I talked to were kind of in favor of sending him down because, and it was easy to see, he was not himself.
Right.
And they equated it to the Bilotti thing, which we also talked about in the month of April. Like they're going to kill this guy. So I get what they're doing with not having those guys up on the roster at the moment. But again, for me, the second inning there was tough to swallow. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about the one bad thing when there were so many good things to talk about. And then you look at the rest of the series, really impressive job by them on Tuesday night to come out and they swing the bats really well. They kind of, you probably felt like they let one get away from them the night before. So they come out with an emphatic statement type win in the second game. But where this whole thing really turns is the third game. And you get this start from Ranger Suarez, and he was so good. And I think of all the things I saw this week, maybe other than JT Realmuto having the series that he had, all the things I saw this week to say, maybe the Phillies are on a little bit of a different plane than we're giving them credit for, is what you saw from Ranger Suarez. Because those first 4 or 5 times we saw him, we're like, man, like, did the workload, like, was it like is he the same guy? Like, is he kind of beat up from last year? How much of an impact is this delay at the start of the season going to have on him? Like, how long is this going to last? Is he ever going to be right this season? And now we've seen him take the ball 3 consecutive times here this month, and he's been sensational. I just thought that for me, I think that's where I go, okay, like we'll get to Aaron Nola in a moment because we could not do a podcast without spending 10 minutes on Aaron Nola. And that Zach Wheeler has kind of become Zach Wheeler again. We'll see where Taijuan Walker's at tonight, but you feel pretty good about his overall direction. To see Suarez throw the ball the way he did against that offense was, I thought, for the lack of a better word, as a fan, exciting. I thought it was an exciting development.
Yeah, he pitched great. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. I mean, and it's not just that start. I mean, if you go back to his last few starts, it's just each one. He's cool as a cucumber, man. I mean, nothing rattles him. Give up a hit, no big deal. Give up a run, no big deal. He's just a guy who's going to go out there and just pitch. And he's now touching 95, Bob.
Yeah.
And that's not a thing that was Ranger Suarez before. Ranger was more about, keeping the ball down, forcing, weak contact, whatever. He's now able to throw a 95 mile per hour fastball at the top of the zone. And that's an addition to him. And that makes him, I think, even better. And so, yeah, I mean, all the superlatives you can come up with to describe Ranger Suarez are so well deserved at this point, because he's really come out of this, the injury and the first few starts and become the pitcher we had all hoped, maybe even better than we had hoped he would be.
So here he is in the month of June. 3 starts, 20 innings pitched, 222 batting average against, 1.05 WHIP, 0.90 ERA.
Yeah.
Pretty good. So
pretty good.
I will then tie in the other point. They caught a break in extra innings with the flare from Trey Turner. You get the right fielder, second baseman running into one another. Ball falls, second and third. They get the sac fly from there. So they catch a break. So acknowledgement to that end. But I will say, you see Sir Anthony Dominguez, who had been really good for about 5 weeks. He gives up the 3-run homer on Wednesday night. You go, damn. And I think there's two things that can be true, at the same time with him. Is he the guy that he was a year ago when he was at his best? No, like the swing and miss stuff isn't quite the same. He's just, you kind of feel like he's feeling his way through some of his appearances. But overall, he's still been very effective. I was extremely impressed that they came back less than 24 hours, and he came back, and that they gave him an opportunity to do it. Less than 24 hours later, after he gives up the 3-run homer to Walker on Wednesday night, they bring him in a tight spot again, and they say, here you go. Go get him. And he responds. Did. He strikes out Walker and Gurriel, and he was nasty. And I think that, one, it says a lot about him, but two, I think that when you talk about the Phillies and the coaching staff trusting the players to give him that opportunity, we're not going to let you think about this for 2 nights. We're not going to let you take this with you. Go get him. You can beat him. And he does. When you talk about the players and the way they feel about Rob and all that storyline, that narrative that's been played up over the last year plus now, that's a tangible example that points exactly to that.
Exactly. And you said it perfectly, because if you don't go to Dominguez there, let's say you go to Kimbrel, I guess, in that spot because you wanted a right-hander, right? What does that say to Sir Anthony? Mm-hmm. What's in his head now all of a sudden? I've been great for so long. I had one bad pitch and a bad outing, and now all of a sudden I'm out of a role. I'm not the guy that they're going to go to in this spot. So I think it's really huge, and that's managing with feel a little bit, and it's but at the same time, it builds that equity with your players that over the course of the year you're going to give them the opportunity to shine, more often than fail, and that's the most important thing. You always hear coaches say, we got to put our players in position, to succeed or make plays or whatever. That's an example of it, and it may be a coaching cliche to say that, but it's a legitimate thing that they have to do, and that was a perfect example of it. And Dominguez responded. It was perfect. It went exactly as planned. Now, that said, if Dominguez comes in and gives up another home run or blows the lead or whatever, we probably have a whole different approach to the way we're talking about this.
Well, we're prisoners of the moment. We're bound to outcomes.
Yeah.
So it's a fun story to tell, and it's a nice little round of applause that we can give here. But yes, if Walker beats him again, you go, what are they doing? Why would they go back to him? It's a terrible matchup. We just saw this. It wasn't even 24 hours ago. So
exactly.
I'm willing to admit that. Yeah, certainly that is fair. I want to get to some of the individual players, but one of the things I think we have to do here, we're right at about the 30-minute mark. We need to dive into what we saw in the finale. And if you are a listener of our show, you know that I've been, I would say, critical of Aaron Nola at times over the years. Certainly this year, I've expressed some concerns on different levels, but I've also tried to be fair in how I evaluate him. And like, do I think that he is a true ace, and all that stuff that everyone here loves to talk about? I don't. I think he falls a little bit short of that. And that's just my general overall opinion. But everyone is just crushing this guy right now. It hasn't been good. You look at the ERA, you look at the home runs, 11 straight appearances now at the home run allowed, the Randy Wolf stat that everyone keeps talking about here the last day or so. And there are, I think, valid criticisms. I don't think. So let me preface this. I received a notice last night, and someone said, like, you're doing what Philly media does when you talk about Aaron Nola. You're feeding you're feeding into this. You're not looking at this with a fair and objective approach. You're taking the low-hanging fruit here, and you're giving people what they want when you say, like, this guy just isn't getting it done in big spots. And I started to think about it, and I said, okay, like, I understand. We proceeded to have a conversation. This is somebody that I have respect for, and we started to talk about it, and I said, noted, I hear you, I get it. But I will say this: it's a results-oriented league. And whether or not it's fair, like whether or not you go through the grind, like the sport, you coach it, you play it, there is something to be said for the way that fans feel, the way that media members are going to approach a story. And I know that it's our job to try to be as smart and fair and balanced as possible. But when you get the backdrop of the story about, hey, I think I'm worth this, Phillies aren't there, you come into the season and you're creating what I think is you're creating a conflict. When you say this is my value and then you don't deliver on that value, you're going to be more susceptible to criticism than you probably otherwise would have been. Now, I read Marcus Hayes' column. Did you?
Yes.
Do you think that was fair?
No.
Yeah, neither did I. And that's someone that has echoed the you need to figure it out sentiment. I thought that was kind of unfair. So I'm setting the stage for this conversation by providing that backdrop. I have more to say, but I'm going to let you chime in now.
It's funny because I feel like you may have been, when the things you were saying at the beginning, I was like, has he been reading over my shoulder as I've been typing? Because I have a story that's going up on Crossing Broad today about this. Because I've been saying the same thing. And look, there's no doubt about the fact that Aaron Nola has not been himself this year. There's not. And the thing that you heard Ruben Amaro talking about it for the first time during the broadcast yesterday about the difference between when he's pitching out of the windup and versus how he's pitching out of the stretch. And then you see Zielecki put into his story, the differences between how he's pitching in those situations and the stark contrast between the two. There's obviously something that's not right with when he's pitching out of the stretch. His numbers are way the hell off. When he's pitching out of the windup, he's actually better than he's been in his career. So it's kind of weird. Like, how does this happen? What's going on? Amaro thinks it's something mechanical. So if it's something mechanical, you assume, okay, that can be fixed, right? But we also live in a world where now everybody's on this thing where everything that's wrong with Aaron Nola is because he's thinking about his contract, because he's can't get over the fact that the pitch clock has changed, et cetera, et cetera. Just shut up and deal with it, right? And that's kind of like the mentality that this fan base has. And it was funny, Bob, because I was thinking about it. I was like looking around the league, and I was like, look at all the pitchers who were top 10 in Cy Young in both leagues last year. Right. And I did the top 10 starters, American League, top 10 starters in the National League. Of those 20 guys, this includes Aaron Nola, okay, only 5 of them are on their similar pace or a little bit better than they were a year ago. The other 15 are just doing exactly what Aaron Nola is doing and looking like their numbers are terrible when in fact they're not terrible pitchers. They're just adjusting. This is not an easy change for a pitcher when you've done it a certain way for so long and your body is trained to do it that way for so long. The one thing that Marcus Hayes got right was when he was comparing pitchers to golfers, right? You train your body to be able to do something a certain way for certain shots, so that you can hit the green every time or whatever the case might be from a certain distance. It's the same thing. Well, then you have to recognize that it's not just Aaron Nola who is struggling with this, but that pitchers all across the game are. And so I think so the final thing is that that's where we have to pump the brakes a little bit to say, well, this guy just stinks and he's having a terrible year because he's got this contract on his mind. Well, maybe not. Maybe the reason he's struggling is because of the sport has made it harder for pitchers. And I think that's a fair thing to do. I mean, you could look at any of those guys. Look at Alcantara. Look at Verlander. Manoah's got sent down. He's been so bad in Toronto, he got sent down. Dylan Cease, Arias before he got hurt. All these guys are worse than they were a year ago. Even Ohtani's numbers are not as good this year as they were last year. I mean, it's just the nature of what's happening in the sport. So you gotta have a little bit of grace, I think, in that regard. That's not an excuse. He needs to be better. They all do, in all honesty. But it's at the same point, you have to be able to step back and just say, okay, why is this happening? And is it something that can over time get better? And I think still it can.
And listen, I agree. I hear you. And I think it's important to acknowledge the context of what other elite level pitchers have done. I think it's important to acknowledge what has happened in the sport. I think that these are all fair points, whether or not fans want to hear it, whether or not the guy that works 10 hours a day comes home and he kicks up and he has his beer and he sees Aaron Nola unravel in the third inning again, I get that, but I also understand the fan frustration because it's the same conversation again and again. This conversation I had with this person that I respect, but was kind of calling me a little bit. He says, listen, guy, he hangs a pitch to a good hitter and he hits a 3-run homer. And by the way, he didn't get any help with his defense earlier in the inning. Like, these guys get paid too. And I'm like, I agree with that. And I can acknowledge that in a vacuum. But when you look over start after start, and this thing kind of continues to happen. And even if there's valid explanations in a vacuum for each individual occurrence, you do have to acknowledge, like, the result is not there. It's right. Not what they want. I think that Aaron Nola probably, walks off the mound and says, like, damn, I was pretty good today, but I still gave up 4 runs. It's not where I want to be. I think that internally they have to look at it and say, your process is good. We see so many great things. We've got to figure out how to clear this last hurdle. Like, there's nobody that's sitting there just high-fiving one another and saying, hey, your ERA is mid-4, and you've given up another big-time home run. Awesome stuff, Right. So at what point is it fair to criticize? And you talk about, well, go ahead.
I think it is fair. I think it's fair to criticize, but I think you have to criticize within the parameters of what's going on. I mean,
so then let me ask you this. Is it fair to criticize? Is it, and seriously, is it fair to criticize nobody on base? Opposing hitters, 190 this season, 581 OPS. He's been awesome. Yeah. He's been awesome. Runners on base, 304 batting average against and 904 OPS.
Yeah.
You're talking about one of the best starters in baseball, electric numbers with nobody on, one of the worst starters in baseball with runners on. That's over 15 starts.
Yeah.
So I think you have to be able to say, like, that's not good enough.
Well, sure. And that's where the criticism, but and I think that's fair, Bob. And I think that's, if you're going to criticize Aaron Nola, you got to criticize on those that's specific. And it was nice to finally hear, the broadcast. Look, this is why I like Amaro. Like, he's willing to tell you what's not right. And he says, look, it's something mechanical in his delivery out of the stretch. And then McCarthy asks him, he says, do you think he's tipping pitches? And he says, I would have to do a deeper dive into the video to see if he really is. He said, but even if he was tipping pitches, his stuff is good enough that he would get outs still. We'd still get guys, even if they knew it was coming in, they would still make outs because of, you're not going to know exactly where the curveball is going to break to, et cetera, et cetera. He said the problem is, and he showed the replay of the home run, is the pitch was just not a good pitch. Right. And so that is, you got to be able to deliver that pitch better. Now, you look at the inning and you sit there and go, okay, Schwarber misplays a ball, right? And so that's a run. That's a guaranteed run. Then he gives up 2 singles. One of them was a good single, but the other one was a real soft contact. I think it was like a 68-mile-per-hour single, right? If I go back to StatCast, 68. Oh no, that was the McCarthy one. 73.2 on Geraldo Perdomo's single, right? So it's like, so you got guys that are getting on base with a little bit of bad luck, partially on the pitcher, partially on the fact that it's bad luck, and then you hang a freaking cookie to Ketel Marte, who's a great hitter, and he freaking kills it. So that's what kills you in that game. You have bad defense, a little bit of bad luck, and then you make a mistake that ends up killing you. If you get out of that inning only giving up a run or 2 runs, we're not having this conversation today. So it really comes down to that 1 or 2 pitches. And then other than that, he had 17 swings and misses, 9 strikeouts, really pitched well the other 5.
Is it fair to say it just feels like that pitch for him this year, and this could just be a product of purely shitty luck, but it just feels like that mistake
is killed him.
Coming when bad things are kind of snowballing against him, and it's just like that mistake. And you could say, well, but he isn't making those mistakes all those other times. So the reason why you're fixating on this one instance is because he made the mistake. But it just feels like, man, like of all the times in this game to have given up that home run, throw that particular pitch, it was not a good pitch. It's not like that pitch and that result was not a product of bad luck. You're just like, damn. And it just feels like it's happened to him so much this year. But here's another way to look at his start yesterday. He goes 6 2/3 innings. Here is everything he did yesterday with the 3rd inning extracted. 5 2/3 innings, 2 hits, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts. And the walk came in the 7th, and one of the hits he gave up was a bunt single.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he was that good. And then you look at the 3rd inning, 1 inning pitched, obviously. 4 hits allowed, 4 earned runs, the one being the 3-run homer. And so you have just an outstanding start that gets muddied up by that stretch in the 3rd inning, which was set on fire by the fact that Kyle Schwarber got a bad jump on a ball, and then he compounded the issue by just sort of flipping his glove at it, trying to body it, and then it gets by him and it turns into a double. And that kind of just set the wheels in motion against Nola. There's another way to look at this, though. And just to go a little bit deeper, because I want to be totally fair here. Talking about, his performance and maybe what he's done and the result not matching it. Here he is. There's 33 qualified pitchers in the National League right now, starting pitchers. He's 10th in WAR, according to Fangraphs. He's 12th in expected ERA. But yet, of those 33 qualified starters, his ERA is 28th. So he's got the 12th best expected ERA, but he's got the 6th worst actual ERA. That is such a significant gap between expected outcome and reality and actuality. It's hard to wrap your mind around that. And you just go 2 other things that just really jump off the page at you. He's tied for 5th amongst all NL starters in WHIP right now with Zach Wheeler, 1.10, and he's 9th in batting average against. He's been hard to hit. I know that the control has gotten away from him at points, but he's still limiting base runners to an elite level. But man, like when he puts them on, it hurts. And that's what they've got to figure out. That's what they've got to figure out here. Yeah. And I think that is the fair and balanced Aaron Nola take. Like, I don't know how else to say this hasn't been good enough from a results level, but yeah, has it been somewhat of a product of bad luck? Sure. And is he doing a lot of really good things that I think are probably getting overlooked because we are sort of lazily saying like, well, he just can't bear down in big spots and the contract and the pitch clock. Yeah. So to that person who, again, I respect, who had some criticisms, I hear you. That's the best I can do for you.
And that's fair, Bob. I don't think that you've been overtly critical of the guy on this show. I really don't. I think that you've been fair about it. And I think as someone who is viewed as an Aaron Nola defender, I think that those criticisms that you have had have been absolutely right. I mean, in this and within this season, when you're looking at it, this is what has to be fixed. And the only thing that I would say back is I do believe that this is something that can be fixed. I don't think that this is something that you sit there and go, "Oh man, he just doesn't have the
Oh
he just
no,
doesn't
this
have it
you watch him
upstairs." And
pitch.
yeah,
If you watch him pitch and you're telling me that
yeah,
your takeaway right now is he doesn't have it. He's not good anymore. He's
yeah.
not a good pitch. Like I don't think, and I think that that's actually what makes it more frustrating to
Well,
us.
it does.
He
It
said,
does
"Hey,
make it
listen,
frustrating. Yeah,
velocity's way down, way down. He's terrible with men on base. He's terrible from the windup. He can't locate his pitches. But again, he has that third inning, comes back, he gets 9 of the next 10 guys.
yeah,
You know, it's just it's been something really kind of confounding to watch. And again, I'll just give you one more here. In June, now 3 starts, 20 innings pitched, 192 batting average against, 1.00 WHIP. He's got a 4.5 ERA.
yeah.
It's crazy.
It just doesn't. It's an outlier it's a statistical outlier with Aaron Nola right now, and that's why I stand by that's why I remain bullish that this is a guy that's going to get it right, because I think that these kids look. It's either going to be one of two things: either he just completely implodes, right, or he figures it out and he gets back to being himself. I don't think you can live in this middle ground, because the stats don't.
I don't think that although I would say I didn't think that this middle ground would continue to this point, but I agree with you. Something's got to give here. Like,
right.
There's no way he can continue to pitch this well to these results.
Yes.
And it's probably a comforting situation for the Phillies, because they're sitting there and looking at this and saying, we have to make a decision on this guy. He's either going to show that his ask is legit, or we can reconvene in November and say, come on, man.
Yeah. No,
someone's going to pay him, by the way.
Oh,
someone is
he's
going
the second.
to
He's
pay
the
him.
second best pitcher on the market.
There's
after
this
Ohtani.
idea. I heard someone say today. I was getting my coffee, and I heard. I'm not going to say who I think it was, because I can't say for sure. I was bouncing back and forth between the two radio stations, and they're like, he might have cost himself $40 million this season in his next contract. I said,
Nope.
Give me a fucking break.
Nope.
Because some team, it may not be here, and like maybe the Philadelphia market can't appreciate greatness, or this fan base is unrealistic, or whatever. That's a conversation for a different day. But there's a team out there that's watching this and diving into these numbers and saying, this guy's still going to be really good for 4 or 5 more years. We'll pay him, especially because look at the market again. Where you started this conversation. Step back, get your nose out of just what you see here every day. There's nothing out there, and every team needs.
Well, that was another thing. That's another thing that I wanted to kind of dive into just kind of real quick, Bob, because I think that this is an interesting thing too. We keep talking about the Phillies. Oh my God, they need a number 5 starter. They need a 5th pitcher, right? Mm-hmm. And I literally went through every team in baseball. I went through every team and I said, who were their expected 5 starters at the beginning of the season? And look at everybody from 5 on that has pitched for them. Yep. Okay. So in other words, the 5th starter and then any other call-ups who've come up and made a start. This includes bullpen games. Okay. Major League Baseball, all told, are 30 games under 500 with a 4.86 ERA and a 1.354 WHIP in games started by the guy who was originally going to be their 5th starter and anybody who's been given a start otherwise. It's terrible. And there's nobody that's good. I mean, really, even good teams have struggled. The Tampa Bay Rays, who everybody looks at and says, oh, this is a team that knows how to do their pitchers and everything else. First of all, they've used 13 starting pitchers this year. 13. Yeah. And they said, well, it's because they do a lot of the opener thing, whatever. They've got 9 pitchers on the injured list, 6 of them on the 60-day injured list. So let's keep that in mind too. They've lost 17 games started by 5+ in their rotation.
Mhm.
And and the Phillies, their numbers are not good. We know this. Okay, they're 5-14, 5.60, but their WHIP is actually league average. It there 1.351. And the other thing about the Phillies is they've thrown fewer innings than all but 6 teams with their fifth starter plus whoever. They've only
Right.
thrown 74 innings with those guys. They're only Washington, the White Sox, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and San Francisco have less. Cleveland, for example, has thrown 220 some innings with their fifth starter plus. Like it's outrageous how bad pitching is in baseball this year.
Yeah, there's not a lot of depth. And it goes back to what we've talked about. People are very critical about the Phillies and their lack of a fifth starter. And I get it because you talk about the payroll, the expectations. I understand. But I would argue, and I know that you had the conversation with Middleton back in March. He was concerned about the pitching, and we've talked about that numerous times on the show. But I would contest that they actually were probably better positioned from a fifth starter standpoint than most teams. Bailey Falter, nobody could in their right mind could have expected Bailey Falter to be that bad. And by the way, he continues to be terrible.
Yeah.
I don't know that you'll see him in a Phillies uniform again.
I don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen.
I heard multiple things that have led me to believe that.
Yeah.
And I hate doing that. Like, I would love to be like, this is why I think that. Here's exactly why I've had these conversations with these people. I can't.
You can't say it. No,
I can't do it. Yeah. But I've heard multiple things that make me feel like no shot.
Yeah.
They are going to take a different approach this weekend. I'm fairly certain. One, I think that they are concerned about the amount of volume and the way that they've utilized Matt Strahm to this point. And you see that his effectiveness has started to dwindle here recently. I think that you're going to see. I think it's going to be Sanchez.
Yeah.
Tomorrow. I'm fairly certain that that's what we're going to see. I mean, don't hold me to that, but I think that's the way it's going. But the point being, between Falter, certainly Painter, even like the Nick Nelson Plasmeyer backup Sanchez, who I think we're going to see, like there were reasonable options to pin down that fifth spot, especially because you thought it was going to be Painter and then some mix of probably Falter. That's 2 guys to hold down one spot, both of which you feel reasonably confident in. It hasn't worked out. So I can't kill him. Although I admit it's embarrassing in the moment, I kind of understand how we've arrived at this point.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It's terrible all across the league. But let me throw something at you, Bob. And I think this has kind of been flying under the radar a little bit. But there was an update, and I think I saw it in Alex Coffey's story out of the Inquirer a few days ago, where they asked about Noah Song. She asked about Noah Song. And he's been throwing bullpens, and a rehab assignment is coming soon. He has to, in order for the Phillies to hold on to Noah Song, he's got to be on the roster for 90 days, the major league roster for 90 days. Otherwise, he gets offered back to Boston. That would mean, in order for it to happen this year, he has to be on the active roster starting at the latest July 4th. Okay. Could you see if you're mapping out this fifth starter spot after tomorrow, they don't need it again till July 1st? Is it possible that Noah Song makes a couple of rehab starts, gets added to the active roster, and is a guy who's throwing you just that odd fifth start, couple of innings, 3 innings, and continue to build him up until you get to September, or until the trade, and really at least until the trade deadline, and then September
trade deadline, and there's not someone else here.
Well, like here's the thing. So here's what this is why I'm not. What are you going to have to trade for a good pitcher at the trade deadline?
Okay.
And you see where I'm going with this, right? Because there's only going to be a handful of decent pitchers that are going to be available. You have so many teams who consider themselves in this race. So the price is going to be a premium. You're going to have to give up on your young stud pitching prospects, at least one, if not two, to get a Marcus Stroman. And if you don't want to
trade, would you trade Mick Abel for Marcus Stroman right now?
I don't know.
It's the only consideration, because you want to say no.
Yeah, I want to say no.
But you also have to understand that, I mean, let's look realistically. And I know the Phillies are going to spend, and they have a new ownership structure that's going to allow them to continue to be aggressive. And as long as Bryce Harper's, I get all that.
Yeah.
But if we're being honest, where this roster's at, and I know things can evolve, but 23, 24, 25, like you've probably got to win the World Series in the next 3 years. So do you take that all-in approach? And it doesn't have to be Abel, and it doesn't have to be Stroman, but do you take, insert name here, McGarry, Abel? I guess it's got to include one of those two guys, because I don't think that they would go. I don't think Painter's going to be involved. So if you're talking about piece of significance and return, it's going to have to include one of those two pitchers. So philosophically, do you say we've got to do this now? Or do you say, hey, we're a wild card team. Like, we just can't do it. This is why we're in this position. We've got to, let's turn it over. We're not going to re-sign Aaron Nola. We need to take as many premium shots at a high upside starting pitcher moving forward. We need all three of these guys in the system because we need two of them to land.
The only way I think I would do it is if I knew I was getting a quality starting pitcher for the top part of your rotation beyond this year.
Right. So and let's be honest, Marcus Stroman's been great.
Yeah.
Lucas Giolito, we've talked about him. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
He's not Cliff Lee. This isn't 09 Cliff Lee.
Right.
So
right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So what I'm saying, what I'm kind of going at here, Bob, is I think the Phillies might zig while everybody else is zagging.
Do you think they go hey, let's hope that Noah Song, Nick Nelson, recovered Andrew Painter down the stretch is enough in that fifth spot? We're going to hold on to our stuff.
I'm not. I think that they might try and add a pitcher, but maybe not a guy that's like a top end guy. I think you might see.
How about this thought? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, like, would you do a Drew Smiley again? Would you go that route? I'm saying, that's kind of where I think they might.
This is the question. This is the question. So I could see a scenario where the Phillies, I probably regret saying this, but they're kind of middled, where they're not going to win the division, but they're clearly in the playoff field come the end of July. Like, they're 5 games up on the final wild card spot. They know they're going to make the playoffs. They don't need a premium pitcher to make the postseason. So they're not going to do that deal because there's not division championship potential. We're not going to make it if we don't do this potential. So let's say they land in that in between. Then they realize, well, we get to the playoffs, we don't need a fifth starter to compete in the postseason.
Right.
But I go back to I don't know who's going to be waiting for them on the other side, but I assume that if they make a run, you're going to have to get through the Los Angeleses of the world without home field advantage, the Atlantas of the world without home field advantage. And then on the other side of it, if it's Houston or whoever the hell comes out of the AL, Tampa Bay, whatever it is, do you need another guy that you can pitch in game 2 or 3 other than what you have right now? Or do you feel like when you line up a Wheeler, a Nola, and a Suarez, and then, a Walker as your fourth, I guess, is that going to be enough? Or do you need another guy that you're game 2 potential, I call it?
So I think what ends up happening here is the course of the next 6 weeks, if you got to see how Nola and Walker are going, right? If Walker continues to do what he's been doing and pitches well, if Nola can, like we said, adjust and get back to where he needs to be, then you don't need it. To me, you don't need. So when I mean zig rather than zag, maybe they go out and spend on another big bat instead. They go get a player to add to the lineup and just say, we're going to just beat the shit out of you. We're going to pummel you with our lineup. Maybe that's where they go, and not necessarily for a top end pitcher. I think that when you look at what the way things are going, if you get Nola back to being Nola, which we've already discussed, I think is a possibility, and Taijuan Walker can continue to be what he's been of late, you don't really need it. Not to say you want to go with a bullpen game every 5th game. You don't want to tax your bullpen, but I do think that there are going to be some options coming that you can have that will get you through.
I want to treat moving forward. The reality is that Andrew Painter's not a part of it. I just think you have to look at it that way. I know he threw a bullpen earlier this week. He's throwing another one this weekend. He's progressing well. Is there a world though where he does come back and it's August 3rd and he makes a controlled 8 starts down the stretch for him or for them, 5 innings at a shot, and he becomes that guy. Like, is there any world in which he A, gets back and actually can provide the innings, and then B, is effective enough that he meets the hype in the middle of a stretch drive and then finds himself actually starting a playoff game? Like, how about that? If you're an odds maker right now, what are the chances that we see Andrew Painter throw an inning in the postseason for the Phillies? What do you think?
That's a good question.
Really, you don't have to even make it odds, but give me a percentage then.
I think it's better than 50%.
Wow. Okay.
I do.
I think that really changes the math of how you go about the trade deadline, because if you think that he's going to be healthy enough and good enough that he warrants postseason innings, then there is a logjam, because you're going to use Suarez, you're going to use Nola, you're going to use Wheeler, assuming no injuries here, and certainly one injury can change everything, and that needs to be acknowledged. But yeah, then maybe you don't go for broke trying to add a top end starting pitcher, certainly one that doesn't have control beyond this season, because you're likely going to lose one as is. Like, so say you bring in like your Giolito, and then next season Giolito's gone, Nola's gone, and you've traded Abel, gets a little dicey.
Right. I just think that it's more likely that they're going to go with bats. And I'm not saying that they're not going to trade for a pitcher. I do think that they'll trade for somebody to kind of plug in on the back end if you need like a handful of starts or whatever. But I don't think they're going to target bigger name pitchers. I just don't.
Well, especially with these numbers, Philly starters during the month of June, highest or best WAR, the most WAR, however you want to term that, 4th best ERA, fielding independent pitching, tied for first, batting average against, best in baseball, 187, 2nd best WHIP, best in the NL. It's an elite rotation, Anthony.
Well, it's what they thought. That's what they thought it was going to be all along.
For 2 weeks. So I'm willing to look at the 2-week most recent sample size featuring the Detroit Tigers and the Nationals, who put the ball in play, not a terrible offense, rather than the other 2 months. Listen, we've eclipsed an hour, and we haven't even talked about certain things that I think like have to be mentioned. And I don't know if you have anything else you want to hit on, but like I can rapid fire things.
Go ahead. Let's do rapid fire.
How do you have this show and not mention this stuff? But I'll start with Bryson Stott. Last 7 games, hitting .444. He's 12 for 27, 2 home runs. He's hitting .333 in his last 15 games. He's hitting .333 in his last 30 games. Is he like tracking on the fringe of being an all-star?
Yes. This was going to be what I was going to say. It's like I've been pushing, the buttons for say, hey, Castellanos should be the Phillies all-star.
I don't think you have to. Yeah, go ahead.
And I still think he is.
Have to push that hard though anymore on that.
Right. I still think he is. But I think Bryson Stott is now in the conversation as potential second all-star for this team for sure, especially at that position, which is not, loaded with superstars in the National League. Like I think he's what, 5th in the league in hitting now, I think, or 5th or 6th in the National League in hitting. And he's been great. And best two strike hitter in baseball. Both with batting average and number of hits. Like, it's legit. I mean, I think that he is now creeped into that all-star conversation.
I think he's going to have a very hot 2 weeks though here moving forward to actually do it. I just think it's like so under the radar, unless again, Rob Thompson will have some say on the roster. It's just, I think he's like knocking on the door. I just don't know that he's walked through the door.
The one thing that could blow it up is, fan voting. Harper's second currently amongst the DHs. Like if he gets in, you got to put Castellanos. You're probably not taking Stott at that point.
How do you view Bryce Harper? I mean, I think if you look at the numbers, it's I don't think you can say as a designated hitter that Bryce Harper on merit in 2023, even acknowledging the remarkable effort to come back early, is a National League All-Star. But do you want to see Bryce Harper in that game as a national fan? I mean, for Phillies fans, it's a slam dunk. Of course you do. But that's, I think, where you have to kind of make a decision about what the All-Star game is. Do I want to see Bryce Harper because he's one of the game's biggest stars and he's had a decent season? Sure. Does he deserve to be on that team as of this moment?
No. Right. Agreed. And I think that there are some things with Harper, and we talked about this before. Like he's so talented that even when he's struggling, he's able to kind of do things here and there to kind of prevent the struggle from being like a real bad slump.
Yeah.
But
He's like hitting like 260 over his last 30 games. He hasn't fallen off a cliff, but it's not
right. Exactly. But when you'll look at bats in a game and like 3 of them will be terrible, but then he'll get a key hit with runners in scoring positions, driving 2 runs, and it's like, well, there's Harper. Like he's able to do those things, right? Yeah, he's not been himself the last few weeks. I think he's kind of, got to play a little bit of catch up here. But at the same time, because of how talented he is, I don't think he's ever going to get to a point where he's going to have the struggles that Trey Turner had earlier this year or Real Muto had earlier this year. So I mean, that's just who Bryce Harper is.
So we have to talk about Nick Castellanos, and we've talked about him a lot on this show. You've advocated for him as an all-star. I do not think that is a difficult case to make any longer. You look at his numbers this season, he's hitting 316, 855 OPS. He's 4th in batting average amongst National League hitters. He's 4th in hits, 2nd in doubles, 13th in slugging percentage, 15th in overall OPS. It's a great story. It's a great turnaround. He's a hitter with a track record who went through a tough year in 2022. He's been so key for this team this season. If there's one Philadelphia Philly right now, on June 16th, it deserves to be an all-star. With all due respect to a number of other guys who have gotten things together here lately, it's Nick Castellanos.
It's hands down. And it's been, what impresses me the most about him when I watch his at-bats now, Bob? And he still has, that swing and miss. I mean, it's still there. It's just not as pronounced as it was a year ago. But I think that he's a guy that you see, he misses a pitch, or it's like, oh man, it's one like, he should have had that one. He should have made contact there. He's able to step back. He asks for that. I like when he asks for time. Like he asks for his timeout in the right moments. And I find that a lot of the times, like you can see him processing it in that moment and then gets right back in there. And so many times he comes right back and gets a hit. Like that's the thing. Like last year you would see that he would go up there and he would be totally guessing. Mm-hmm. And now I think that he's gotten to the point where he's able to focus really. I don't know what it is. I don't know if there's anything that they've done to really concentrate his focus, but I think his focus at the plate is just so far better than it was a year ago. And I think that's making the difference for him from what he was to what he is.
And we talked about the start that he got off to, and you look at his overall numbers, and I just rattled them off, and you say, okay, great. But how much of that was supported by the hot start? And it really isn't. I mean, you look at his last
in June.
His last 15 games, he's hitting 387 with a 1.025 OPS. Yeah. I mean, he just keeps hitting. So the consistency.
He's got 85 hits, 86 hits, something like that.
I know he's tracking 200.
He's tracking 200. It hasn't happened since Rollins' MVP season. I mean, that's how good, that for a Philly, I should say, that hasn't happened since Rollins' MVP season. I mean, is 200 going to happen? Maybe, maybe not. But, if I would have told you at the beginning of the year that he would be tracking for 200 almost halfway through the year, you would have laughed at me. Right. And now here he is. He's tracking that. And it's really, if he could, he's got 80, I think he's got 86 hits through 69 games, right? So he doesn't even have to be on this pace to get to 200 at this point. He can actually slow down a little bit and hit 200. So that's impressive to me. That's really impressive to me.
And then the final guy that we have to talk about is JT Realmuto, who finally ends. And I'm really happy for Jack Fritz, the nightmare of the David Bell last Philly to hit for the cycle. That's finally over.
Yeah,
19 years later. We record Monday morning, and we're talking about, now I'm going to take a little bit of a victory lap here because we're criticizing JT, but I'm also making the point that we were down this road before with him last year.
Yeah.
You wake up, it's June 24th. He's got a 656 OPS. He's just not good anymore. Is it over? And then the second half of the season, Philly's MVP. We record Monday morning. And he has a 709 OPS. He's coming off of a day off Sunday and an 0 for 3 against the Dodgers on Saturday. Since then, he has raised his OPS by some quick math here. I believe 85 points, 794. He's a borderline all-star, and he did it in 3 games. So I love the fact that they gave him, because my point on the show Monday was that they need to start giving him more days off.
Yeah.
He's caught more innings over the last 3 years than anybody by like a wide margin. I don't know the numbers, so I'm not going to guess, but it's like, I think well over 100, 200 innings. This season, 4 more starts than any other catcher, 28 more innings coming into the week than any other catcher. And I love the fact that as hot as he was for 3 days, that they sat him yesterday.
Yeah.
It's exactly what he needs, because he's going to get another day off after the Oakland series.
Right.
Like, that's what they need to do. I'm
They
telling you, there's a correlation between getting this guy off his feet and getting him going.
And I agree with you. And not to mention, you have the major league's leader in bunt singles as his backup, right? So
who's played like 1/9 of the other guys that are on that list. So
he's got 5 bunt singles now this year. Garrett Stubbs. It's pretty damn good. That's pretty impressive. You know, it almost makes you think, Bob, when you get down into the the games that matter a little bit more, and you get to the nitty gritty, and you're talking about situations where you might have one of your platoon situations where you want to send up a pinch hitter and say going to take the lefty out and go to the righty or whatever, vice versa. If you got runners on base and there's nobody out, do you consider going to Stubbs to bunt? As good of a bunter as he is that a thing? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think my overall thing here is with him that there are limitations.
Yes,
but man, he gets the most out of what he's got. He's a good dude. He's awesome in the clubhouse, and it's not just like, well, he's a great clubhouse guy, so let's keep him around as a mascot. Like, he provides value to them. He's in the middle of everything when he plays. He seems like, even if it's an 0 for type of day, and maybe it's easy to kind of say this because you like him, but it just feels like every time he plays, he provides some value.
The defensive play he makes on Corbin Carroll's bunt yesterday is incredible. I mean,
excellent play.
It's a huge play.
Probably preserves the lead for them.
Yeah.
If he doesn't make that play, you assume, I think, that Arizona ties a game.
I agree. So I mean, he does things that matter and that make a difference. So,
very good find by them,
for sure. And the last thing on the Phillies before I get to my one last thing, just to mention, how about Alvarado the other night? How many times he broke 100?
16 straight pitches.
Holy hell, that's something else, right?
Yeah,
that is something else to have that kind of weapon.
I know that they had the hiccup with Dominguez on Wednesday night, but we've been saying it. I'm going to stick to this. This bullpen is the strength of this team.
Yep.
That starting pitching, finds some consistency here, and it has found its footing in June. That continues. That bullpen's going to thrive. So
yeah, it's going to be really good. All right, the one last thing, we got to get into something that I think both of us are going to be a little bit angry about. Did you see Rob Manfred's comments yesterday? About the whole thing with Oakland.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a more tone-deaf individual in a power position in your lifetime? Because things that he said, Bob, were so anti-fan. Everything he said was a criticism of the fans. Yeah. It's like, what are you, nuts? You're telling your clientele that they suck. That's basically what you're doing. What the frig is he thinking? Oh my God! Baseball should be embarrassed that this guy is in charge of the sport, because every step that he takes, he steps in a big old pile of shit, because he is terrible at speaking to the public. It goes back to the very beginnings that he got in there. You could talk about how he talked about the World Series trophy doesn't matter, right? Like
shiny piece of
metal, right? Like that whole thing. Like everything this guy says is a disaster.
Well, not only does he take a swipe at the fans, essentially, but then also he essentially lied about the negotiations and the deals in place, and he's trying to back the owner, Fisher. It's a mess. I don't know. Like, I've seen some people say like Oakland doesn't deserve a team. This is a natural happening. I'm not going to pretend to know the Oakland market. I'm not going to pretend to know what that fan base truly is. I know that I've seen teams in other sports leave. I know that it's about money. I know that being in Las Vegas is much more palatable to an ownership group than being in Oakland. And I get it. And you're trying to maximize your money, because for these guys, it's what it's about. I can acknowledge all those things. And I can also easily feel sorry for the fan base. I just sometimes I feel like these leagues, commissioners, they make it harder than it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say what it is, like, we didn't like the deal in Oakland. We don't like what the city did. That spurred this. Then we saw an opportunity that made a lot more sense. Guy has the right to pack up and leave, and he's going to do it. And it sucks for the fans. I understand why the fans are upset, and people aren't going to be happy with those comments. But to kind of take a shot for what?
Yeah. It's so, and it takes a shot at academics. That was the other thing too.
Yeah.
Like, you think the studies that were done
have been wrong before, and
yeah, like, come on, like, it's like, dude, this is like legitimate questions. Like, just answer the question. Don't be so passive aggressive and just dismissive of the people
like, it's
that
almost
matter.
like how dare you waste my time by asking me these questions, by bringing this up.
He's just, literally, I've never seen a worse commissioner in sports, and there's been some bad ones. There have been some really, really bad ones.
I can't imagine you're real high on Gary Bettman.
No, I don't. I think he's terrible. I think he's, there are things that he's brought to the sport that have been good, but I think that there are things that he's done that have held back the NHL.
Are you longing for the days of Bud Selig?
You know what the thing about it was? I didn't think Bud Selig was all that great, but in retrospect, like, he was significantly better than this guy. And so, yeah, I would rather Bud Selig be in charge than Rob Manfred. He's the worst commissioner I've ever seen. My blood boiled when I read those comments, and I have nothing to do with the Oakland A's. It doesn't matter to me, but just reading it, like, what are you saying? Like, what are you saying to the fans by these comments? You're basically telling fans that they don't matter.
Right.
That you don't care about them.
Right.
What a terrible, terrible business leader he is.
Yeah.
So that was my
listen, I'm with you. I fully hear you on that. All right. Well, unfortunately, a negative note to close out an otherwise positive show. A fair and balanced pro Aaron Nola, anti Aaron Nola result podcast. So Phillies have 3 games in Oakland this weekend. I suspect that ought to go well. We will see. We have been down this road before with the Phillies. Just when you think that things are finally trending upward, they have a tendency to kind of have that magnetic force pull them back down to where we're going to meet on Monday and say, come on, man. But we'll see. I'm feeling pretty good about it. So for Anthony Sanfilippo, I'm Bob Wankel. You can, and I meant to do this at the beginning of the show, which is when we really ought to be doing this. You can follow us on Twitter at UpPhillies, at AntSanPhilly, at Bob Wankel CB. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, if that's what it's even called, and YouTube, and all of those good places. Make sure that you're following, listening, and doing all that good stuff. And we will talk to you soon.